Paul Bellini. Can you tell me about how vital a role he plays in The Kids in the Hall?
Yeah, well, so in my book, Kids in the Hall, One Dumb Guy, still in print. In One Dumb Guy, I got Paul Bellini to really explain his role. And so Paul Bellini he'd gone to university with Scott Thompson at York University in Toronto. Paul was in the film department and Scott was in the acting track. And so clearly they needed each other. So Scott would be on camera for Paul's video experiments. And so they knew each other from way back. And then um, and so then I'm trying to skip a lot. So when the Kids in the Hall first started, Paul would bring the video rig out and film them in this club called the Rivoli. And so every week they would be able to look at their game tapes and see how sketches were playing. So they were constantly videotaping these live shows, and it built up an archive. And sometimes in rehearsal they would have video rolling, and sometimes they would be capturing discussions and even arguments. And then on trips backstage, they're on tours, they would be backstage and they might be running video. And when they first moved to New York to work out their comedy for Lorne Michaels, they were videotaping just before they went out for the night. And so they have all this footage. So that's there. And then when they get signed to the TV show, they realize that a lot of Scott's material, being the only gay guy in the troupe, Paul and him they were not romantically involved, but they were both gay men who were good friends, and they knew each other's humor. And so Bellini would set up Scott for a sketch, or he would add to something. So they realized Paul should be in the writer's room basically as a Scott wrangler. That's what they call it, the Scott wrangler.
That's funny.
So Paul became, when they finally expanded the writers in the second season, they hired a few of their friends. Brian Hart was one of them. Norm Hiscock, who had been one of the original, he'd originally worked with Bruce and Mark in Calgary. And so they brought Norm Hiscock back in to be one of the writers. Now he's gone on to be a huge TV producer for worked on The Office and Parks and Rec and all these things. But Norm Hiscock was one of the writers, and Paul Bellini was specifically tasked to be, first they had him as a receptionist, actually, to be honest, but he was a bad receptionist. Then they just made him the Scott Wrangler. And then the towel thing came out of the fact that they were joking about something, and someone, I think maybe one of them had been to one of the men's bathhouses in Toronto, and Mark said something like, "We should just do a sketch where it's Bellini in a towel," and they did it, and Bellini went along with it, and then they worked it into other sketches, and they had a contest to touch the man in the towel. So you would, if you're send your name in, you might win be flown out to meet Bellini, or Bellini will fly out to meet you, and they'd film you touching Bellini. And then at the very last episode of the first run of the Kids in the Hall, he's the guy who buries them. So when the series is over, you just see a grave, and then Bellini dancing on their grave, and saying, "Thank God this is over." And then, so what they've done for season 6, as you might know, is they open up with Bellini being summoned to dig up the coffin, or the grave of the kids, a shallow grave actually, of the Kids in the Hall. So Bellini now has a continuing role, to the point where I have conjectured that the entire Kids in the Hall is a figment of his imagination. So what we're actually seeing is, it's like Saint Elsewhere. It's like Bellini's imagination is that there's this 5-man troupe, the Kids in the Hall. But anyway, that's just my crazy theory that I'm